A man sits frozen in a sterile hospital room, his hands clamped over his ears as if trying to block out a sound that isn't there. The air in the room grew thick with the sharp metallic scent of ozone, the smell of lightning that had struck too close. His breath hitched in his throat, each inhalation a struggle against the invisible pressure that filled the space. Then, a whisper, not from the hallway but from the walls themselves. A dry, papery rustle that spoke of forgotten things. The linoleum floor beneath his bare feet felt unnaturally cold, a damp chill seeping up that had nothing to do with the hospital's climate control. It was the scream he remembered most. Not his own, but the one that had torn through the static of his car radio just before everything went dark. Now, in this silent room, that same electric screech was echoing inside his skull. A memory, with teeth. And the worst part? The doctor said he was found alone in his running car, unharmed, with the radio playing nothing but soft, classical music. His eyes, wide with raw terror, reflected the abyss of his torment. Man, make it stop. Please, God, make it stop. Narrator. What you just heard wasn't madness. It was a literal radio signal, plucked from the airwaves and playing on a biological receiver no doctor had ever documented. This story begins with a man named Leo. Warm, sun-dappled shots of a suburban street in Austin, Texas. Leo, 32, is shown in home video footage laughing with his wife, Sarah. He's fixing a porch swing. Leo Mercer had built a quiet, contented life. He was a senior linesman for the Texas Power Company, a normal man with a loving wife named Sarah. His days followed a steady, predictable rhythm, the kind of unremarkable happiness that feels permanent and secure. It was a life of simple comforts, a fragile peace that hummed along like the power lines he maintained. But beneath that surface of normalcy, in the quiet hum of the wires and the still Texas air, something else was waiting. He was the man they summoned for the most perilous repairs, the storm-induced outages, the jobs demanding unwavering nerve and absolute comfort with dizzying heights. He understood the flow of electricity, its power, and its logic. He respected its absolute, unforgiving nature. He never once imagined he would become part of its circuit. August 12th, a storm lashed the night. Flashing emergency lights cut through the downpour, painting the scene in stark, urgent reds and blues. In his soaked gear, Leo began the treacherous climb up the slick utility pole. Each rung was a gamble against the sheeting rain and the groaning wind. The transformer, shattered by a summer storm, fled 10,000 volts into the sodden darkness. Protocol demanded we wait for a full isolation of the line. The wet air carried the distant, frantic wail of a hospital's backup generator. A children's hospital was on that dying grid. Leo made the call, and the world erupted in a violent electrical convulsion. A deafening zap tore through the air, followed by an oppressive silence thick with the scent of ozone. Under the sterile hospital lights, Sarah's face was ghostly pale as she clutched Leo's motionless hand. The only sound was the faint hum of machines, a cold dread settling in the sterile room. Monitors beeped a frantic rate. He lay there, a canvas of brutal burns. The shock should have killed him instantly, a lethal current seeking its path to ground. It seared through his arm, arched across his chest, and tore from his leg. In its wake, it cooked muscle and scarred the delicate pathways of his nerves. Leo Mercer's heart, against all medical logic, continued to beat, a defiant miracle that defied explanation. But this was merely the prologue. Weeks later, back within the familiar walls of his home, a new reality began to settle in. The air in the room grew thick and carried the faint metallic scent of ozone, as if a storm had passed and left its charge behind. The physical wounds knitted shut, but Leo returned home a changed man. He sat rigid in his armchair, flinching at shadows only he could perceive. A constant irritability gnawed at him, and his headaches felt like shards of ice piercing his skull. The faint scent of ozone clung to the air, a metallic reminder that some injuries never truly heal. And then came the voices. At first, it was faint, just murmurs drifting from another room. Then the whispers grew clearer, warped like a radio tuned between stations. The air in the room grew thick with the scent of ozone and the unsettling clarity of those distorted whispers, fragments of phantom music, spectral melodies that weren't there. Sarah blamed it on PTSD, on trauma-induced tinnitus. Leo, too, began to accept this explanation, to cling to the comfort of a medical diagnosis. Then, in a late-night diner under the hum of fluorescent lights, his friend Mike saw through the facade. Mike's voice cut through the greasy air, his words simple and devastating. "You look like hell, Leo." Leo rubbed his temple, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Not really. The buzzing, it intensifies near power lines. As Mike spoke about football, a clear voice cut through, like a distant radio broadcast. Traffic backing up on the I-35. Leo's face went slack, his breath catching as horrific understanding dawned. Then came the breakthrough. As Leo drove past the local AM radio tower, his skull suddenly filled with a booming, crystal-clear country music station. He swerved to the shoulder, his gut clenching, and vomited violently onto the asphalt. It wasn't just pain. It was a sensory assault that left the air tasting of ozone and static. His nervous system, those scarred and rewired nerves, hadn't merely been damaged. They'd been hijacked. They were active. His entire nervous system had become a living, biological antenna. Doctors stood baffled, smelling the sterile air tinged with ozone from the monitoring equipment. Neurologists theorized the massive jolt had altered the myelin sheaths coating his nerves. These biological insulators had transformed into perfect conductors for specific radio frequencies. His dental fillings weren't just metal. They were a crude demodulator, humming with unnatural energy. The constant gnawing ache in his bones wasn't illness. It was a gruesome power source, feeding something hidden. He could smell the ozone of shorted circuits and the iron tang of old blood in the back of his throat. Every movement sent a fresh jolt through him, a sickening transfer of life into a machine he couldn't see. Leo Mercer was a prisoner in a body that involuntarily tuned into frequencies he couldn't escape. Sarah's voice breaks as she recalls the torment. Quote, "He'd wake up screaming, hearing a late-night talk show host, a weather report, a trucker's CB radio, all inside his mind. The air in his makeshift Faraday cage grew heavy with the scent of ozone in desperation. Each involuntary transmission left him more gaunt, more exhausted. A man trying to escape his own skin. To prove he wasn't losing his mind, he began transcribing the voices he heard. When he checked the broadcast logs, the timestamps matched perfectly. The isolation was eroding him. But the outside world had become a storm of invisible signals. Only one place offered the silence he needed. The vast, empty desert. Leo drove for hours, until the last lights of civilization vanished behind him. He stumbled out into the absolute silence, where the only sound was the wind whispering over the scrub. The air smelled of dry earth and something metallic, like ozone after a storm. For the first time in months, the relentless noise in his head had gone quiet. In the profound silence, Leo sank to his knees in the sand, tears of relief carving paths through the grime on his face. The void of his own thoughts was a welcome emptiness, a hollow sanctuary from the horrors he had fled. Salt and damp earth filled his nostrils, the only sense in this barren escape. This was not just peace. It was a profound, terrifying relief. But in the suffocating silence, something else surfaced, a memory, not a radio broadcast, but his own mind finally able to speak. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and shattered glass. In that flash of blue, there was no pain, only a bone-deep chill that seized him. The cold wasn't just on his skin, it permeated his very core, sharp and metallic. His thoughts crystallized into a single, stark realization. This was not of this world. Then, silence. A void where sensation should have been. Sarah's face, pale and expectant, flashed before Leo's eyes. The porch swing remained unfinished, a jagged promise hanging between them. He had to tell her he hadn't completed it. Then, back in the desert's oppressive heat, Leo's head snapped up, and his fragile relief shattered like glass. Then the quiet shattered. A spectral transmission pierced the desert's stillness. Weak, crackling, but undeniable. A numbers station. The cold, automated voice of a woman began its loop. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and the metallic taste of static. And then the single word, repeated with mechanical precision. 7, 42, 0, 9, 7. The air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and ozone, a metallic tang coating the back of his throat. From the darkness ahead, a faint, rhythmic scratching began, like rusted metal on concrete. Primal dread took hold, freezing him in place as the numbers echoed in his mind. Even in this desolate expanse, 100 miles from any semblance of civilization, a signal pierced the void and found him. The cold, metallic scent of ozone filled the air as the broadcast crackled to life, its message a chilling anomaly in the empty silence. A voice, distorted and hollow, began to whisper the numbers. 42, 0, 9. It was a spy broadcast, a phantom transmission that had no right to exist here, and it was speaking directly to him. A dead drop for agents that no longer existed. A ghost in the machine had become a ghost in the man. Then, Leo began to laugh. It was a raw, broken, hysterical sound, torn from his throat and lost to the desert air. His hands flew up, clawing desperately at the sides of his head as if to tear something out. But it was useless. The signal wasn't a sound he could block out. It was already inside, echoing in the hollow of his skull. There is no off switch. Present day, Leo Mercer lives in a shielded room, a Faraday cage where no signal can breach. A notepad lies before him, its pages dense with timestamps and cryptic radio snippets. He looks into the camera, his expression eerily calm, a man who has learned to coexist with the unending broadcast. He can filter much of it, but the world is saturated with signals, growing more potent by the day. 5G, satellite radio, digital traffic, an ever-thickening soup of electronic noise. It's an ocean of static he is condemned to wade through, a constant, invisible pressure, humming just beneath the skin of everything. Leo's voice drops to a hollow whisper, his eyes fixed on the camera. The doctors call it adaptation. They say my brain is learning to filter it out like background noise. A faint, metallic scent hangs in the air as he continues, his words flat and drained. They label it a triumph, but they don't understand. They never will. I'm not filtering it out. I'm tuning in. I can feel the shape of the city's transmission, the ebb and flow of it. Sometimes, I think if I just concentrated, I could find the right frequency, not to listen, but to broadcast. He lets that terrifying thought hang in the air. He survived 10,000 volts, but his punishment was eternal reception. A man turned into a living witness to every secret the air whispers, with no way to ever shut it off. The camera holds on Leo's ear, the silence slowly giving way to a low, omnipresent hum. It swells into a cacophony of the modern world, overlapping music, fractured news reports, and streams of digital data. The sound becomes a physical pressure, a choir of invisible signals that saturates the air with a sharp scent of ozone and a prickling electric touch. It crests, overwhelming, and just before it becomes unbearable, it cuts to black. What happens when your body becomes a prisoner of the airwaves?
Like the journey? Subscribe and join the next expedition.